Our next speaker needs no introduction at all. I've been hosting this conference for 15 years now, and I'm pretty convinced that he has spoken at every one of those 15 conferences. Please welcome the HASC chairman himself and also vice chairman of the HASC itself, Rob Wittman.
Hey, folks. Well, first of all, it's great to be back. Jim, thank you so much for your incredible efforts each year to bring together all the thought leaders in what's happening with our nation's defense. And, you know, I know every time we get together, the term is sort of overutilized about modernization and tipping point and those sorts of things. But, folks, if you look at what we face today across the globe, I would argue that the threats that we see today are every bit as big, if not bigger, than where the world was in 1938. If you look at China, if you look at Russia, if you look at North Korea, if you look at Iran, if you look at non-state actors around the world, when you take those in summation, I would argue the world is a more dangerous place than it has ever been. The forces of evil are out there constantly, and they are relentless. And there's a contrast. There's a contrast between systems of government that believe in the rule of law, that believe in preserving individual liberties and freedoms, believe in everyone's individual autonomy, and believe in the sovereignty of nations. And there's never a bigger difference, I think, in world history than what we see right now. So the question is will good prevail? And good will prevail as long as we put the effort in to make sure that indeed we overcome the forces of evil. And do not underestimate the forces of evil today, and do not underestimate the level of effort that it will take for us to overcome that. I think that we are in for the effort. I think that we will prevail. But folks, it's going to take an all-hands-on-deck mentality. It really is going to take an all-of-forces approach. It's going to take partners across the world. We cannot do this by ourselves. We have to make sure we have our friends and allies there with us. We cannot resource this by itself. And make no mistake about it, this is not a Cold War. This is not like it was when we were at an adversary with the Soviet Union. Because remember, the Soviet Union was a strategic adversary, but there wasn't really an economic competition. Today, as we speak, our adversaries like China are both an economic competitor, a strategic competitor. They look to defeat us in every way possible. And make no mistake about it, they are not a strategic competitor, although some people call them that. They are an adversary. They are an adversary. And they will do anything to prevail. They will lie, they will cheat, and they will steal. Let's call it for what it is. You know, I hate to dance around and go, well, you know, if we talk to them nicely, maybe they can be our friend. No. Xi Jinping has stated clearly time and time again that their purpose, their direction is for China to be the world dominant power, and they will step over, through, or on anybody in order to get there. So what do we have to do? We have to make sure that we are calling this for what it is. We need bold leadership. We need people to say, listen, here are the things that we need to do. There needs to be a call to action, and everybody needs to be on board. And what does that entail? It entails a force that is modernized. It entails a force that has the wherewithal, the capacity and capability to amass the ability to deter and, if called upon, defeat our adversaries. Let me emphasize that. Deter and then defeat. Because I do believe we have the ability to deter at this particular point. If we don't amass the capability and capacity in a quick form, then unfortunately we will be faced with a scenario of having to defeat. I would argue the latter is the more difficult path. The easier path now is to deter. How do we do that? Well, folks, I think that there needs to be a complete change in mentality in how we prosecute the defense of our nation. And you know, from its very existence, the Pentagon has been a hardware-centric organization. It's been all about, let's create the most exquisite platforms in the history of mankind, and we have done that. Incredible platforms. F-35, aircraft carriers, Columbia-class submarines. I can go right down the list, but all we have to do is to look at what's happening in Ukraine. And we know that those exquisite platforms have a role, but we know we cannot prevail or we cannot deter if all we do is to spend years and billions of dollars continuing down the road of only doing exquisite platforms. That means we have to do attritable platforms. That means we have to do expendable platforms. It means that the Pentagon has to go from a hardware-centric organization to a software-centric organization, where software drives innovation, where software informs what we can do with hardware, where we are able to utilize resources across the spectrum, not just resources that come from the federal government, but resources that come from the private sector, where we encourage venture capitalists to invest in emerging technologies and dual-use technologies, where we have private equity firms that said, you know what, I'm all in. I want to put money here because I think this is incredibly important to the future of this nation. And we are seeing that today. The question is how do we enable that to happen faster? How do we make sure that technology gets quickly to these exquisite, not just exquisite platforms, but to our attritable and our expendable platforms? Because that's how we will generate mass quickly. We will generate capability and capacity that will be able to deter the Chinese in the time frame that Xi Jinping has said that they will look at reunifying with Taiwan by force, 2027. So anybody that uses a metric or a time frame and says, well, we can get this stuff done by 2030, wrong answer. Wrong answer. 2027 needs to be the metric. That's how we will have the opportunity to deter. And I think everybody in this room is part of the effort that has to happen. This is an all-hands-on-deck moment. It is members of the military in uniform. It's civilians in the Pentagon. It's people in the private sector. It's everyone in this nation that has an interest for the principles of liberty and freedom that this nation stands for and other like nations around the world, because this is truly a dichotomy. It is a choice between nations that believe in the rule of law, between nations that believe in individual liberties and freedoms, that believe in the individuals and believe in the things that we believe in, which is the counter to systems of communism and socialism. That is indeed where we are today. Make no mistake about it, folks. This is the difference and the choice between good and evil, and good will prevail. But good prevailing is hard work. Good prevailing is difficult decisions. Good prevailing requires everyone to be part of this effort. Folks, we have seen in the past where we have been able to do this. When we face adversity, we answer the call. And I believe we're at that same point right now where we will indeed answer the call. We will bring our resources. We will bring our creative and innovative skills to the table, and we will indeed deter. And if called upon, we will prevail if we find ourselves in conflict. So, folks, thanks again. I look forward to your questions. It really is an honor and privilege to join you again. And I look forward to the challenges ahead and look forward to your questions.
Well done.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
Did anyone have any question on his priorities?
I actually did. Mr. Chairman.
Well done, sir.
Yes.
A lot of focus on the strategic level China fight.
Yes.
As you know, Congress is very tactically focused many times, and we're focusing very heavily on Ukraine.
Yes.
As you think about that broader fight, what are some of your most important investment priorities for that China fight that you'll be focusing on?
I think right now we have to be able to activate the ability to generate mass and capability and capacity in the attritable systems realm, in the expendable systems realm. If we've learned nothing from Ukraine, it's that's how Ukraine was able to counter Russia quickly. And if you look at the things that they've been able to do, they learn on the battlefield literally in real time. So how do we use technology? How do we use software to inform what's happening with hardware? How do we make sure that we have systems that literally learn overnight? How do we do things like use digital twin technology? How do we take information that comes off the battlefield and use that? Folks, today forward, the most valuable asset across the globe is not going to be currency. Folks said, well, it's the dollar, it's the yen. No. It's the yuan. No. The most valuable commodity going forward will be data. Make no mistake about it. And we, as a nation, have more data than our adversaries do. And data is what will allow us to learn and do things at the speed of relevance. Let's make sure that we are doing a better job at not only collecting that data, but using that data. And that means we have to make sense of the data. There's a ton of it out there. In fact, the Department of Defense is one of the largest repositories of data anywhere on the face of the earth. How do we turn that into parts of information that makes sense. So how do we annotate that data? I would argue that we do a pretty good job of that, but we can do better. How do we synthetically annotate data? How do we take data at the speed of relevance and make it useful in how we adapt our systems to the things that change around us? Look at what the Ukrainians have done. Pretty innovative. You know, they will take what they learn on the battlefield from a drone, and guess what? They'll go right to their laboratories and reprogram that drone, and the next day, guess what? That drone's a little more effective than it was the day before. We have to be able to do that. We have to operate at the speed of relevance. Yes.
Hey, sir, Scott Porter.
Yes.
First, as a good Virginia boy, opening up on a high note, the Richmond Spiders are the Atlantic 10 champions.
Go Spiders. There you go.
One question I asked Congressman Smith earlier today, too, is, you know, we have worldwide responsibilities, but as you look around, is there any region or zone that you're a little concerned that we aren't doing as good as we should, or we might be falling a little behind in?
Listen, I think that if you look across the spectrum, I think there are challenges in every branch of the military. You know, I want to make sure that we are keeping up with building ships, building the right ships, having the right mix of capability in our Navy. I want to make sure, too, that we have the right mix of strategic aircraft. Let's make sure we have the right capability there. Let me go to two areas that I think are incredibly important. First of all is autonomy. In this past year's National Defense Authorization Act, I put my bill in called the Autonomous Systems and Policy Act to make sure that there is a Secretary of Defense level effort to make sure there is a autonomy effort across the different sectors of the Pentagon in every service branch, and it needs to be informed by what happens through the most current research and what's happening there in the private sector. Autonomy is going to be key. Another element, too, is let's make sure that we use the technology that we have developed here in the United States. And the great example is weapons technology. We look today at the challenges that we face, and if you look at any sort of wargaming, what you find is that our long-range weapons magazines pale in comparison to China. So what happens in the Indo-Pacific? We see the highly contested environment get bigger and bigger and bigger. And if we look at the scenarios about what we have to do in order to fight our way in, we have to degrade that highly contested environment to a contested environment. And even there, we have a challenge. You know, I don't want our aircraft carriers and our assets to have to move away from the fight. I want them to be able to move into the fight. How do we do that? We have to immediately use our technology for our weapons systems. That's why in last year's National Defense Authorization Act, I put in there that we will create in the Pentagon an Office of Energetics. Why? Because the metric that we use in our weapon systems for both propellants and explosives is a baseline called IDX, developed back in the 1940s. This is a great compound, very safe. But you know what our adversaries use as their metric, as their baseline? They use a compound called CL20. You know what CL stands for? China Lake. Because we developed it, and our adversaries use that as their metric. And that chemistry allows that weapon to go farther, gives it more range, gives it more lethality. My language in this year's NDA tells the Pentagon immediately in the next 12 months, you will take 3 weapons platforms and you will upgrade them with this modern chemistry, which provides more range and more lethality. You will prosecute this effort in the Pentagon in a uniform way. You will do research to figure out what's the next generation of energetics. And then as we develop new weapon systems or we do service life extensions, how do we take those systems and use modern chemistry to get the range and lethality that we need so we don't get outsticked by the Chinese? So our weapons magazines have more power. They have more boom. They have more distance. Those are things that are going to make a difference, and that's how we can close the gap quickly. You know, we don't have to go to programs of record and take years and years to develop new weapon systems. Listen, we've done a really good job in precision. We've done a really good job in guidance systems. Our weapons are some of the most accurate in the world. We got that. Let's make sure we get the range and lethality out of our weapon systems.
Thank you for your comments, sir. Doug Brooks with FGI Solutions. We
Yes.
provide services in post-conflict environments and have offices in Ukraine. You brought up Ukraine. Obviously, it's a really strategic importance for us. And right now, our Ukraine funding has been held up for months
Yes.
by a very small number of people. And I'm wondering, what is your insight on the possibility of this funding getting through in the next couple of weeks, maybe?
I think where the speaker is right now is a set of priorities. He wants to get all the appropriations bills done. I think talking about supplemental before you get the appropriations bills done is probably a little bit premature. I do think that the debate will come up on supplemental appropriations. I do think there's a pathway forward for us to get a supplemental done, but you have to be able to clear the deck with all 12 appropriations bills first. I'm confident that that will happen. I'm confident that we will get to the point to discuss what needs to be done with funding Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel.
Sure, there's one back there, and if
Yes.
we're quick, we can get this one over here too, sir.
Gotcha.
Hi, Congressman Justin Katz of Breaking Defense. Last week, as well as earlier this morning, you were talking about how you and Congressman Kelly want CAPE to get behind 31 amphibs for the Navy.
Yes.
You know, the Marine Corps is obviously on board.
Yes.
Senator Sullivan says that the CNO is on board. And even if they weren't on board, you passed a law that says, well, get on board. It's not up to you anymore.
Yes.
So my question for you is, why is it important, or why does it matter whether CAPE supports it, since you seem to have everybody else and the law on your side? Thank you.
Well, listen, it's very important that CAPE support this. I'm sure you'll hear from them in a few minutes here, but I want to make sure that we understand the direction from Congress is 31 amphibs. We've done purchase of LPD. We want to make sure that stays on track. We also know that if we do multi-ship procurement on amphibs, we know we bring down the cost. We know as we look at perturbations in the industry, whether it's the build side or the maintenance side, if you put them on a roller coaster ride, it increases our cost. It also increases the time that those systems are able to get out there. If you look at the ability for us to deter the Chinese, it will be the Marine Corps being the stand-in force in the Pacific and making the Chinese take a second look, and for Xi Jinping to wake up every morning and say, no, maybe not today. Why? Because of the capability that the Marine Corps Navy team brings to the table. And the ability to project force immediately is through our Navy Marine Corps team and through our amphibious fleets. And it's both hard power and soft power. Look at what we do in the soft power realm. If there is a tragedy somewhere around the world, whether it's a natural event or otherwise, who's the first on the scene? The Marines. Marine Corps Expeditionary Unit, the ARGMU as it's called, Amphibious Ready Group, Marine Corps Expeditionary Unit. They're the first on the scene. We have great ability to do good, to be able to project power, to deter and use soft power. That's the only asset in our inventory that can both project hard and soft power. We need those assets. That's why the Congress said 31 is the floor. That's why we have given direction to say let's do multi-ship procurement so that we can get those platforms in at the most efficient cost number as possible. That's why we reiterated with OSD CAPE to say, by the way, just acknowledge that that's the way that we need to go about this enterprise.
Hey, sir. Captain Nate Krieger. I'm an acquisitions officer for the Air Force.
Yes.
Sort of to your question earlier about how the Pentagon acquisition system should move more towards a software-centric versus hardware-centric. Earlier today from one of the other speakers, we heard them talk about how moving towards more software-centric would mean different appropriations of money, a different balance, more O&M versus procurement dollars in our current structure of how appropriations work. My question to you is, has there been any efforts to look at how we do appropriations from a color of money procurement versus O&M versus RDT&E in the balance of how to incentivize that software-centric approach, or maybe even different appropriation approach altogether, getting away from procurement, RDT&E, O&M, et cetera?
Actually, there have been three things that have changed recently. One is a program called APFIT, and that is putting dollars into phase 2 companies to get them to scale to phase 3, to get them across the valley of death. For many companies that have developing technology, including software that enables hardware, that's their difficult space. So APFIT, Ken Calvert's doing a great job there. More money will be in this year's appropriation for that. The Defense Innovation Unit, Doug Beck, is doing a great job there with taking money through DIU and getting those emerging technologies there, especially softwares. We see more and more of the companies that are becoming part of this. They're companies that have started out as software companies. And now they're looking at how do we enable software to provide capability and capacity in our platforms. So we're seeing more and more of that happen. So the appropriations process is reflective of DIU. Also, Dr. Jason Rathje in the Office of Strategic Capital is doing a lot to leverage private dollars, to leverage private equity, to leverage other venture capital firms that are putting money in this to be able to really accelerate the development of software, to be able to look at how do we use off-the-shelf technology, how do we use dual-use technology, how do we look at things differently. I just spoke this past week at the Technology and National Security Conference there that was held by MIT and Harvard. And what was really enlightening to me is the number of students today that are engineers in that space that are saying, I want to be part of the defense enterprise. I want to bring my innovative and thoughtful ideas because I think what I have in mind in software development, in technology, can be used to make sure that we deter the Chinese. Those are things that are starting to emerge that as little as 5 years ago, you didn't see any of that. In fact, you probably saw the opposite on college campuses. Like, no, we don't want anything to do with the defense enterprise here on the college campus. Now it's, yes, let's bring it in. Let's make sure we're part of developing that. Look at places like Lincoln Labs and others. So we have turned the corner on that. The key is that, as you said, how do we reflect that in acquisition? It is a difficult change because the Pentagon is not well versed in how to acquire software. And it's because it's a difficult enterprise. It's not like setting requirements for a piece of hardware. You have to wonder, well, how do we set the requirements for software? Because software changes constantly. How do we make sure that software is upgradable? How do we make sure it's reflective of what the needs are, not today, but next month and next year? You know, whereas when you go to production on a platform, it's like, this is what we're going to produce. You know, we'll have flight 1 of that version. We'll have the next flight, so we'll modernize it in tranches. You know, you can't do that with software. Software is a dynamic set of capabilities. So how do we make sure that we can reflect that so it changes at the pace of relevance? Those are keys. That's a tough change for the Pentagon, but I think the Pentagon has to do that in today's world. Thank you. Thank you, Jim.